Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Andy Abramson, just jumping on here for a couple minutes. Hope you're doing well. It's Friday for me. Not sure. Maybe it's Friday for you, or maybe you're watching the recording of this. Hey, here's what I want to do. Is I'm actually tomorrow heading out to Jonesboro, Arkansas, to do a training with college ministry leaders there. I wanted to jump on for just a couple minutes and actually go through the training that I am going to go through because one, I think it'd be super helpful, beneficial for many of you who are leading ministry out there as you think about just how to build, develop, grow, stabilize whatever your ministry. So I want to walk through this training with you over the next couple minutes. So let me share my screen there. Hopefully you should be able to see that. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through these different pieces. Some of you have seen parts of these pieces before, and I'm just going to kind of put them together in a singular kind of concept, some framework, some different things that you can begin to use. And so as you begin to think about ministry, one of the big questions that we have for ministry is this idea of how are we going to move, right? People who are on the outside of our ministry, how do we begin to move them into the ministry? And so the analogy we're going to use is this ministry as being like a house, and there's two parts to this house. There is what we're going to call the first part, which is the lower room. Okay. The lower room, I want you to think about in terms of like the structures, the systems, the things that you do on a kind of a day-to-day, week-to-week basis that is a part of building out that ministry. Now, a lot of us have been a part of ministries where the lower room is the extent of the ministry, right? So we have the systems, we got the programs, we got the events, we're doing the things. But one of the things that we consistently challenge ministry leaders to think about is what does it look like for their ministry to have actually an upper room, right? That would actually not be how you spell room. There you go. Talking and writing at the same time. So this idea of the upper room, and the upper room is really what we talk about as upper room is you think about this idea of like making disciples, this picture of making disciples that we see from, like Matthew chapter 28. And really the goal of being is how do we create a ministry, or even more so like a movement of disciple making. And really this is where we want to begin to help our people move towards is what does it look like for us to have a ministry that isn't just lower room based, right? It's not just about the programs, the structures, the systems, the things that we're doing, but also has this like upper room component where we're creating a ministry or a movement of disciple making, and we're really helping people get to that point. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about the kind of three different parts. Is I want to talk about what are the initial things that draw people into the lower room. We'll talk about these 4 P's. Then I want to talk about the development of the upper room, right? So we'll go up and I want to talk to you about kind of 3 stages of development in the upper room. And then lastly, what I want to do is I want to give you 3 different frameworks that we use as you think about what are some ways tactically or within our ministry that we can actually help people up the staircase, right? Because it's one thing to have like a vision for the upper room, have the upper room, this idea, but we actually need to think about what it looks like actually to lead people into the upper room. So let's talk about first the lower room. Now, there are really 4 primary reasons why people come into the ministry initially. Okay. And we talk about these as being the 4 Ps. Now, some of these, when you think about like college ministry, are going to be more relevant than others. But let's talk about these 4 Ps. Okay. Number one is, let's talk about place. Okay. Sometimes people come because of the proximity of where the ministry is at. It could be the physical space of where it's at that is actually the initial drawing point. Now, like I said before, I think that this is true maybe more for like families or maybe kind of churches at large. But I would see that there's some instances, especially when you talk about like proximity, that really begin to think about the place being one of the driving factors to why people come in. Okay. Number two, so that can be place. Number two is it could be programs, right? So the programs can be the thing that actually drive or invite people into the lower room of the ministry. And so it could be a Sunday school class, it could be a small group, it could be a missional community, it could be the weekly gathering that you have. Those programs are the things, so they hear about and say, oh, I'm interested in this event, I'm interested in this piece of the ministry, this program that you're going to have, and so they can be invited in because of the program. Number three is it could be a personality that could be the drawing point, the driving point. Personality. And so you think about like, this could be like a speaker, a worship leader, a Bible study leader. Oh, I really like that person's preaching. I really like their teaching. And so the personality can be the thing. And the last thing, and I think this is maybe the bottom two are the most prevalent in terms of college young adult ministry, it can be the people, right? The relationships. And so you think about, I have friends that go to that church. I got friends who go to the campus ministry. I have friends who go to this Bible study. And so the people can be the thing ultimately that can draw us into the ministry. And so you think about these 4 Ps, they are a part of inviting people into the lower room. And one of the things we always talk about is when we're doing upper room, lower room training, is that these things are not bad, right? It's not a bad thing to have lower room systems, structures, place, programs, personality, people that ultimately drive people in. But here's the challenge, is that we need to help move people into the upper room. And what we experience and what we see often is if we only have lower room activities or things that we're doing, if the equation changes, what we often see is that people will leave and go find a new place, a new program, a new personality, or new people. And we experienced this during COVID, right? COVID was one of those kind of examples that we see that it has really been kind of like, as we look back historically over the last several years, that have why we've seen such a turnover in churches or ministries. Part of the reason that we have seen that is because simply people were coming because of the lower room. And then all of a sudden the equation changed in that. And what happened was people would go find those someplace else. And so the question is, ultimately, how are we going to move people into the upper room? Okay. Now, so that's lower room. Let's talk about upper room a little bit, because I think that there can be a challenge in terms of just like, as we think about like the building of the upper room, I think a lot of times people are just, oh yeah. Like we just need to have an upper room, but they really don't know how to develop and build that upper room. So what I want to do for you is I want to give you 3 different stages that you need to go through, whether you're an individual, whether you're a collective ministry, but even a subset of the ministry. It could be like a missional community or a Bible study or a group of like, what is the development of really helping people to the upper room? And so there's 3 parts I want to talk through in these stages of ministry. Stage number one is, I think that there needs to be, so they need to experience the upper room. Right? They need to experience the somebody needs to experience the upper room. They need to get really even beyond that is even like a vision for the upper room, right? So it takes a person first that you can't build an upper room. And I'll say this even as if you're a leader in a ministry. You can't build an upper room unless you've experienced the upper room. You can't build an upper room unless you catch the vision for what a ministry or movement could look like of an upper room. So I think that stage one, and we try to do this in our coaching process, is how do we get a leader in the upper room? How do we get a person in the upper room? Because I think it really starts there. And then stage two is invitation, okay, of a few. And what I mean by that is you need to get kind of some initial other people besides yourself into the upper room. Now, in a ministry context, this could be like a leadership team. So maybe you as a ministry leader have really caught this vision of upper room. What does it look like for your leadership team to catch a vision for the upper room? If you're leading a Bible study or leading a missional community, you have this vision of multiplication and disciple making in your missional community. But what does it look like to invite somebody else to have that, or somebody else to be in? And so to begin to invite. And then the third part is then beginning to create a pathway for this to happen more consistently, right? So now that you have a couple people in the upper room, you begin to ask the question, okay, and you flip it and you begin to ask the question of like, okay, well, how do we get this more consistently? Is there a way, is there a vehicle or a pathway that we can create that actually would help us begin to get more people more consistently into the upper room? And so stage one is that you have to experience it. You have to catch a vision for the upper room. Stage two is you need to invite a few people into the upper room with you to experience it. And then stage three is really creating a pathway to do that. And so if you're in this kind of the stage of like, hey, we only have lower room stuff, right? We have place, we got programs, we got personality, we got people. If you're wanting to build really this idea of the upper room, what you can begin to do is really think through these different stages. One, first, you experiencing, catching the vision. Number two, inviting a few people with you. And then number three is creating actually an intentional pathway to see that happen even more. Okay. So we have the lower room. So we got this kind of the systems, the things that of what people see from the outside. They see the place, the programs, the personality, the people. Now we're catching a vision for the upper room. Now, what do we do actually in kind of some of this pathway thing of creating more consistency in terms of just like seeing this more regularly? I want to give you 3 frameworks, okay, that will be helpful for you as you begin to think about creating this more consistently, as you think about your different groups, okay? And they're on the right side of the staircase right here. So let me just kind of walk through these with you, okay? The first one is what we're going to call, let me kind of switch my pen to a little bit smaller because these are really small. What we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about head, heart, hands. Okay. Head, heart, hands. And this is a way, and this is a framework that we've consistently used in terms of like just thinking about the development of people. One of the frameworks we use, all of them will be in terms of like developing people. So there's kind of 3 parts as you're thinking about discipling somebody. Okay. Number one is you can understand that there is a head component. Think about like a passage like Romans chapter 10, right? Romans chapter 10, they confessed with their mouth that Jesus is Lord. There's this kind of head, this acknowledgement of understanding, maybe for the first time or being reminded consistently that Jesus is Lord. Right? So there's this head component. The next one is there's this hands component. And the hands component, when you think about like from like Matthew chapter 28, where there are actually things that we do in terms of like our hands, right? So there is the Great Commission. Go make disciples, baptize, teach, preach, love people, care for people. And they're actually like things tangibly that we're doing as an expression of discipleship. And then the last piece is this idea of heart. And heart, you think about like Matthew chapter 22, right? The great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. Now, here's the challenge is that we need to have all three of these components in terms of ourselves as well as discipling other people. So think about this. So if you have head only, think about in this like the demons, right? Remember what Jesus says about the demons. Even they acknowledged that he was the Christ, right? They knew in their mind but ultimately there was a heart issue, a lack of a heart issue, and a lack of like actually physically doing things that were actually contradicting that. And so we see this example of like the demons that had knowledge only, but no hands, no heart. You think about like hands only, right? That have no head or no heart. This is really around legalism. Oh, I didn't spell that right. Let's do this. So you think of people who just work for the sake of doing things, but there's no heart that's been captured, no acknowledgement that Jesus is Lord. And then if it's only heart, this is really around this idea of the biblical concept that is idolatry, right? So you've been captured by the desires of your own heart. There's no outward movement towards a spiritual engagement, nor is there an acknowledgement ultimately that Jesus is Lord. Okay, so you see these examples. Now we can take it one step even further, and even go in kind of the crossover sections where you have somebody who is head only and hands only. The Bible describes these people as like workers of lawlessness, right? So they're actually doing things, they acknowledge, but there's no been heart that has been captured. On the other side is if you have head only and heart, but not worker, the Bible describes this person as the slothful servant, right? Somebody who's lazy. And then you think about somebody who has heart and hands, where they have a kind of this heart that's been captured, hands that are doing things, but not the acknowledgement of the head. This is where we see like the Pharisees, we see Saul here, right? And so the question really is this sweet spot, right? Of finding all of these things together of where does head, heart, hands all come together, where we're acknowledging that Jesus is Lord. Our heart has been captured by loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And there is this outward component of actually participation in the kingdom of God. So here's one of the things that we can utilize as a framework for the people that we're discipling, right? Of saying, okay, as you think about kind of the strengths and weaknesses of these different people, is it a head issue? Is it a heart issue? Or is it a hands issue that we need to develop? So that's one framework that we can think in terms of developing people up into the upper room. Okay. The next one is a tool that we often use that we call up, in, and out. This is going to be similar to the last one, right? So you think about part of kind of Jesus's rhythm of having this upward rhythm, right? So going away from the crowds, connecting with the Father, spending time in prayer, that there was this movement kind of up. We also see this movement in, where Jesus would come off to the mountain, and often you'd see him go down into being with his disciples, his community, and then often there would be this other kind of crowd component, which was really around moving out, right? And so you think about, like, even for us as being a disciple or the people who are discipling, we need to have this also up, in, and out component of up, that we are connecting with the Lord, that we're spending time in prayer, connecting with the Father, together. We need to have this inward component of connecting with the community, connecting with other believers, and then this outward component of connecting with the unbelievers, the world, those people who are not yet followers of Christ. And so even for all of us, I would say that we would have strengths and weaknesses on these different ones, right? So maybe you're stronger in and up and you're not as strong in out, or you're strong in up and out and you're not as strong in. One of the tools or the kind of processes we'll often do is we'll actually draw this into like a spider diagram. I don't know if you've ever seen a spider diagram before, where you can begin to kind of rate yourself. If the middle is 0, and the outsides are 5, maybe for me, I'm going to rate myself in terms of maybe like a 2 in my engagement in, and I'm going to be like a 4 in my engagement out, and I'm going to be like a 4 in my engagement. And so you can see, even as you begin to kind of draw this out, kind of where I'm a little bit lopsided on this example of me, right? So even as you're thinking about the people you're discipling or yourself, is what does it look like for us to have an up component, in component, out component? And then even as we're discipling people, how do we even use this tool, this framework, to utilize as we begin to help people move forward? Okay, so that's the second one. We talk about head, heart, hands, talk about up, in, and out. And then the last one, the last tool we're going to use is, we call this the invitation challenge. And it's a matrix that we use, understanding that there was a invitation component of Jesus as him being the model, right? And so we think about this idea of invitation, think about relationship, and we also think about the axis of challenge. Right. So in kind of one scenario, you can, on this one axis, the vertical axis, you can have kind of low invitation and you can have high invitation. Okay. On the other axis, looking at the horizontal axis, you can have low challenge and you can have high challenge. And so one of the things we do is we talk about these 4 different quadrants. So you think about somebody who is in low challenge, low invitation, right? So if somebody is down in kind of this bottom quadrant down here, is this is really around like apathy, right? So it's like a apathetic culture, right? So you think about this idea as apathy and beginning to think about like, well, there's no whole lot of challenge, there's not a lot of invitation. As you think about this idea of high relationship, high invitation, but low challenge, we talk about this as being a bored culture, right? So there's this relationship with people and they're hanging out and they're doing stuff, but there's not a whole lot of challenge. When you think about low invitation, so low relationship, high challenge, we talk about this idea of a stressed culture, right? So you're doing a lot of stuff, but there's a lack of relationship around you. And really this, where we want to get to, is high invitation, high challenge, which is really around this discipleship culture. And this is ultimately where we want to get to. Now, it's interesting as you begin to look at even some of your group, as you could even begin to put them in, maybe, are you more in the bored or apathetic, or are you more stressed? And so you can use this as an evaluation tool. A lot of times what we find is a lot of people are in this quadrant right here, and the desire is to move into this quadrant right here, or they're kind of down here. They're doing a lot of stuff, but there's not a lot of relationships, and we need to begin. And so you can utilize this as a tool, saying, okay, like even for an individual, are they kind of in this kind of upper left-hand quadrant? And so it's more around this idea of kind of this bored thing. So what does it look like to challenge them more? Or are they stressed out because they're doing a whole lot, but they're not in a relationship? What does it look like to invite them closer into that relationship? And so you can use this as like a collective tool for all of the ministries together, or your ministry together, or as well as individuals. And so those are 3 different frameworks that we will often utilize for helping move um, people we're discipling into the upper room, right? Is we want to think about head, heart, hands. Okay, is this a head issue? Is this a heart issue? Is this a hands issue? Okay, let's think about up in and out. Do they need to focus more on in? Do they need to focus more on out? Do they need to focus more on up? Okay, let's think about invitation challenge. Is this more about like inviting them closer into a relationship with us, or is this more about challenging them to engage more in the kingdom of God? And these are really great, three great frameworks that can help really take people from the lower room into the upper room as you begin, after you've kind of caught that vision of upper room, kind of lower room, and having that really that vision for people ministry, disciplers, disciple makers, disciplees to come into, really catch and invite them into the upper room. So here's my encouragement. Here's what I'm going to kind of do with the crew here this weekend in Arkansas, is I'm going to utilize this stuff and even begin to. So the first question is going to be like, okay, let's evaluate what's the strength of your ministry right now. And you can do this even as you're thinking, what's the strength of your ministry? Is the strength of the upper room? And you need to kind of think through kind of lower room, kind of getting people into the lower room. Is the strength the lower room? And you think about building upper room. Okay. So if you have this vision of upper room, what stage are you in? Right? Is this about you experiencing? Are you experiencing it? Are you inviting a few people to participate with you, or are you in the creation of the pathway? Okay, if you've kind of developed that, what are some ways in which you can move individuals from the lower room into the upper room? There's three great tools, frameworks you can use. You can use up, in, and out. You can use head, heart, hands, as well as invitation challenge matrix. And so hopefully that will be helpful for you, as I just been working on this over the last couple of days, as just kind of getting ready to head into this training later. I figured I'd put it out, maybe have you guys be my test case, my guinea pigs for running through that. And so I think we're 27 minutes in. So I think that's good. Let us know if you need anything. Hope you guys are doing well. I think that's going to be it for today. Have a good weekend if you're watching this on Friday, and we will talk to you later. See you.